I have been putting off doing this video for so long now because I really liked this book and I'm worried I'm not going to do it justice, but I'm going to try my best. Hi, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So it's been a while since I've even done a video like this, where I talk through the different themes and everything, and I'm not going to limit it just to themes this time. There's a few other things I want to talk about as well as it relates to this book, but yeah. It's been a bit and it's weird to get back into this, but I couldn't have chosen a better book to make me want to talk about the different themes in it, because I think there's really just so much that you can talk about despite the fact that this is less than 200 pages, less than 150 pages. That's crazy. So yes, we are talking International Booker 2021. This book has been shortlisted, At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. This was originally written in French and translated into English, and I do want to say the translator's name because we are going to talk a little bit more about her and about the translation just in general, but that was Anna Mostrovicus. God, I hope that I pronounced that right. I didn't look it up beforehand. I do want to say before we get too far into this, I am not going to say that this is a spoiler-free review. In fact, there will be spoilers. However, I think that for certain types of books, it's kind of impossible to truly spoil it because the writing itself is so impactful and I can never portray to you what that does, what reading it does. So yes, I guess in the strictest sense of the word, there are going to be spoilers in this video, but I don't think that this book can really be spoiled. I don't think that hearing any information about it will make you enjoy it less as you read through it. I think that it's done so well that nothing that I say is going to take away from, and hopefully if you haven't read it yet, then what I tell you is just going to make it more impactful for you and just overall a better experience reading. So, a brief synopsis of the book before we dive into it. This book takes place during World War I, and our main character Alpha, who is a Senegalese man, is fighting for the British Army. He ends up losing his best friend, and he actually sees this death happen, and it's really gruesome. His friend is basically begging him to just finish him off so that he doesn't have to, suffer as much as he did, and Alpha isn't able to do it in that moment. And that really haunts Alpha. He begins to feel very guilty for it, and he starts behaving a little bit differently, and he'll go into the enemy camp and he'll attack one of their soldiers, one of the German soldiers, and he'll kill them and cut off their hand and bring it back to his own camp. So that's kind of the premise for the story. That's what you get in the synopsis, and we'll talk about that and more, but that's roughly what the book is about. Now, I want to start off by talking about the setting of the book in general. So as I said, this book takes place during World War I, and I've read a few books that center around either of the world wars, really, but I almost always have gotten purely a European and a very Western European point of view. White. I got a white point of view. But there were 2.3 million Africans that were a part of the French and British armies during World War I. And that's just African. There were also other people of color that were involved in this fight that wasn't really their own. But of course, we are focusing on a Senegalese soldier for this one, a black man who is in this war. So on that premise alone, I think that this is just a good book to read because you're getting finally a different perspective. I'm sure they're out there and I just haven't gotten to them, but I'm happy that this book has that and is as prominent as it is. I'm gonna stop holding this up because it's really reflective because this is a copy from the library. So we're getting this perspective of a black man that is in this war, and not just him, but his entire team, his entire troop. They're essentially weaponizing their race because at the time, people were scared of black people. They were scared of this unknown. And there were so many fears that were being pushed on to people about black people, not from black people, and about how they should be feared, and about how they're aggressive, and about how they're savages, which kind of takes me into the first theme that I want to talk about, which is this theme of savagery in general. The commanders that are telling this army of men to go into fight, they want them to tap into this savagery. They want them to be these really angry and aggressive people as a group together, because that would be more scary to the people that are on the other end, to the Germans that are on the other side, because they already have this image in their head about what Black people are and what they want to do to them, and how aggressive and everything that they are. So they're coming into this war with all of those thoughts already. And meanwhile, the people they're fighting against are obviously just people like they are. And not only that, but they're being exploited into being there, especially the Senegalese. There's this great quote where Alpha sees the fear in this man's eyes. And he says, it's fear of what he's been told about me and what he's believed without ever seeing me. There actually aren't a ton of mentions about race throughout this book, or maybe there is about race, but not about racism per se. But then I think that was probably the clearest line, where it's like, yeah, this is a part of why we're here. And besides that, you just see the commands coming through to be this savage person. So Alpha talks about their captain, Captain Armand, basically wanting them to be able to turn on the savagery as they run out into battle. And so after he sees the death of his best friend, of his more than brother is the phrase he uses to refer to him, Mademba, after he sees him die in such a horrific way and he feels this immense guilt, Alpha starts to kind of think more for himself. That's like the phrasing, or at least the idea that he gets across, where he's starting to think for the first time, and other people aren't thinking, he's thinking. And really, he's in this situation where he doesn't have very many choices. So what he does choose to do is to completely buy into this madness, to the savagery that they want them to be, because it's almost better if he's made the choice to become that, rather than having his superiors tell him to be that. And so that's what kind of shifts him into, all of a sudden, waiting and spending hours to wait and get the hands of enemies that he kills. He kills them in the same way that Mademba died, except that when they are close to death, when they are suffering in agony, he waits for them to ask him just to finish it, and then he does finish it, so that he can kind of just relive that moment with Mademba over and over, relive that guilt, but do it right this time, despite the fact, of course, that this is a completely different person. And then he brings the hands back, and at first everybody is in such awe of this, his captain, his fellow soldiers, and they think that it's just incredible that he's able to do this. They don't ask how, they don't want to know, but they just think that he is great for doing these things. And then once it gets to be the third hand, the fourth hand, that's when they start kind of questioning and thinking that, well, instead, maybe this guy's just insane, and now we're living with this insane person here in our place. And they're not totally wrong. There's definitely something, you can see, even being in the mind of Alpha, that there's something wrong. He has this immense guilt, and not only that, he's continuing to be sent into battle every day, and he wants to have made up his own mind that this is actually what he wanted the whole time, because then at least that gives him this little bit of autonomy. There's this great passage that's, "Don't tell me that we don't need madness on the battlefield. God's truth, the mad fear nothing. The others, white or black, play at being mad, perform madness so that they can calmly throw themselves in front of the bullets of the enemy on the other side. It allows them to run straight at death without being too afraid. You have to be mad to obey Captain Armand when he whistles for the attack, knowing that there's almost no chance you'll come home alive. Temporary madness makes it possible to forget the truth about bullets. Temporary madness in war is bravery's sister. But when you seem crazy all the time, continuously, without stopping, that's when you make people afraid, even your war brothers. And that's when you stop being the brave one, the death defier, and become instead the true friend of death, its accomplice, its more than brother." So this passage is hugely important for so very many reasons, but I think that it so largely ties into this section of using this madness, and how you have to tie into a little bit of madness in order to throw yourself out there over the lines, to run at people literally shooting at you, and they're expected to turn that on when they go onto the battlefield and turn it back off when they come off. And because Alpha is not able to turn it off anymore, or really that's not it, he doesn't even want to, It's unknown if he's able to or not. He purely does not want to turn it off anymore. And because he's not, then that's when he starts becoming this otherworldly thing to even his own soldiers, his own peers. And so as Alpha's thinking about this, as he's doing these things, he starts to question more and more, who is the enemy here? Is it really the people that are on the other side of no man's land? Or is it the people that are sending them out into it every day? When some soldiers are no longer obeying the captain's orders, he sends them out into no man's land and says that they have to run straight to the other side with their hands tied behind their backs, and if they turn around to run back, then their own soldiers that have continued to obey the captain must shoot them down. He says that they have betrayed France and they're not even from France. They're fighting in this war that's not even theirs, and so you ask them, who is the enemy? Is it the one that's shooting at you, or is it the one that's sending you out there to be shot? Now, to go back to kind of something that I touched on earlier, this idea of autonomy and having autonomy through a war, there's something else that comes up often throughout the book, and it's this idea of laughter, of smiles, and having laughter be a part of enjoying something with somebody else versus it being an internal laughter and like you're laughing at somebody rather than with them. Or having a smile on your face and either it's for you because you're happy, or it's for other people because you're pretending to be something that they would be more comfortable with seeing. They're more comforted seeing somebody that looks happy, and that makes them feel better about themselves. That's something that comes up a lot, and it's kind of just sprinkled in. But I really appreciate themes like that where it doesn't dive too much into it, but it just kind of puts little things here and there. And you get to see not just Alpha, but other characters as well. There's one character specifically that is kind of this jokester, and you see him lose his true laughter and it's replaced with this laughter of a crazed person, somebody that's not able to keep it all together anymore. And for Alpha, you know that a lot of the times that you see him, especially as he progresses through the book, he becomes more internalized and he withdraws inward and is on the inside kind of laughing at everybody else. He doesn't really connect with people anymore. He has his own perception of how things are going, and that's kind of just it. It's actually weird to see Alpha we don't really know Alpha outside of the war. You get flashbacks to his childhood, and you know why he considers Mademba his more than brother. You know about them growing up together and that Alpha was taken in by Mademba's parents. But you are getting Alpha's perspective and his view on the world, and including the flashbacks. Like, he is thinking of his memories in the past after he's already gotten to the point mentally that he's at in the book, because right away the book starts after Mademba has died and he's telling you what had happened when he died. So you only see Alpha at this mental state in his life. You don't get to know what he was like mentally before this, because even when you hear about who he was in the past, it's still from his current viewpoint. However, you do get to see Alpha change as the book goes on. His mentality does shift, and it's not really just because of him, it's also because of Mademba. So let's dive into that next. I think the largest concept that we've got here is this theme of duality. There's a lot of opposing elements to this whole thing, which I think is just fascinating in a book that's about war, that, you know, in its most basic terms is one side versus another. It's always, of course, more complicated than that, but it's funny that that is a part of it, but you don't really ever see that. We're not learning why this war is happening. We're not learning who's fighting for what, besides just like the countries. We know like that Alpha's fighting for France and he's fighting against Germans, but besides that, we don't get any information about the war. But we do see all of these opposing factors up against each other throughout the book. So, for example, white and black is mentioned a ton. We've got this idea of a hero versus a monster, where at first Alpha is this hero to everybody, and then he slowly shifts in their minds. Not that he's doing anything differently, he's still severing hands and bringing them back. It's just that he continues to do it, and then all of a sudden their perception of him changes to where they're thinking of him as a monster instead. And then, of course, the largest one would be between life and death. And when I was originally thinking about this, I was thinking about how Alpha kind of represents life while Mademba represents death. But actually, I think that they represent the exact opposite. Or maybe there's a gradual transition throughout the book, because Alpha becomes so consumed with his guilt about Mademba, about not being able to end his life and to make it so that he didn't have to suffer as much as he did. Alpha is constantly thinking about death. He is constantly causing death, and in a way that he wants to be up close and personal to it, not in a way that his other soldiers, his other peers are creating this, are bringing this death into the world, who are just kind of shooting at this mass. It's easy to not feel that personal connection, but Alpha is going up, he's looking at the person in the eyes, and he'll often talk about their eyes, their blue eyes. He'll track down a blue-eyed soldier, and he'll I don't want to talk too in depth about exactly what he does. It is a little gruesome, but he'll watch them slowly die, and then when they beg for just him to end it all, then he'll do that for them, and he'll take a hand back with him, and he doesn't want to even let go of his hands. He continues to be so up close and personal to death itself, whereas Mademba, who is dead, but he almost becomes so vivid through this death through Alpha's mind. You hear so much about Mademba, and he gets talked about in more and more and more of a positive light as the story goes on. Not that Alpha really says anything negative about him in his mind. He does talk about a conversation that they had before going out, and different conversations that they've had in their lives where they've kind of like poked fun at each other, and Alpha specifically poked fun at Mademba. But anything that he says about him is so positive, and he almost seems way more full of life than Alpha is. As a reader, when I think about Alpha, it's a lot easier to picture death alongside that. And when I think about Mademba, I just think about his life, despite the fact that he's dead for the entire story. He's dead before it starts. But I think that the real purpose of having this duality in here is to show that multiple things can exist in the same place. Both life and death can exist within the same person. That despite the fact that these soldiers are both black and white at night, all blood is black. It'll continually oppose things in the stories, but then bring back together with these universal terms like the title of the book. And so you're forced to reconcile with everybody's not all just one thing, but there's so many more things to them. And that, I think, is really the whole message of the story. If it only had one message, I would say that that's it. That it's easy to see somebody as an other, as a different than you, but really that person is made up of so many different things, and they can be opposing things at the same time, but you're just never going to fully know that. You're never going to fully understand that. So I think that as you get kind of towards the end of this book, it starts to become more confusing, whereas in the beginning of the book, a lot of things are repeated over and over, and you see this repetition, and it'll just like gradually change. Observations that Alpha will start in one place, and he'll continually mention them, but they'll just shift really slightly, and then at the end of the book, a lot more happens all at once, and I think it can be tough as a reader to fully understand. I wanted to like reread this book like 5 times right after I finished it, and if you Google "At Night All Blood is Black," like one of the first things that come up is ending explained. So I might be wrong about what my interpretation of this is, but I want to share it anyways. I think that the most obvious part about it is that you almost see this like melding of Alpha and Mademba coming together. This starts long before the ending, where, like I said, Alpha thinks so much about Mademba, especially Mademba's life, that he almost becomes a part of him. And of course, being referred to as his more than brother for the whole book really solidifies that. He's not just a friend, he's not just a brother, he's a part of Alpha. And then as you get towards the very end of the book, it's written in a more literal sense, where you get to see Mademba almost waking up in Alpha's body and truly being a part of him. And these two things, these two opposites that represent life and death, have officially become like one person. So Alpha, out of concerns for his mental state, ends up being sent to the back. Oh, that's another duality, is the front and back. So being at the front, in other words, like in the battle zone, versus being at the back where he is being like checked on mentally. And during this portion of the book, Alpha forces himself on this woman, on the daughter of the doctor that is charged with helping him, that is taking care of him. And the scene actually happens 2 times, and from 2 different perspectives, it seems like anyway, from both Alpha and Mademba's perspective. Once again, this is my interpretation of the ending. I don't know. I could see other people interpreting it other ways, but what it seems like to me is you get Alpha's perspective of it, where he is forcing himself on this woman, and you get Mademba's perspective, which is a consensual experience. And this is likely because before Alpha and Mademba went off to fight in this war, he had his first experience, his first time with a girl that they were both really interested in, but she chose Alpha, and Alpha felt guilty about this, about Mademba never being able to have that experience before dying. I think that a lot of people struggle with the end of this book because they feel like it takes away from the message of it, but I think that instead of doing that, it makes it even more clear to recognize that nothing can be all good or all bad, nothing can be truly one thing or another. But as I said earlier, since you kind of get to see Alpha become this monster to the other soldiers, to his peers, since you see that progression, there's also a lot of talk about him becoming this kind of otherworldly being, that even his own people that are just like him are starting to think of him as an other, and they start seeing him more as this entity, as this sorcerer of death, that he is like this embodiment of true evil. He becomes this almost mythical being. Very early on in the book, we get this passage. For everyone, for the soldiers, both black and white, I have become death. I know this, I understand. They think I'm a sorcerer, a devourer of people's insides. They think that I've always been one, but that the war has revealed it. God's truth, nobody wanted to attract the evil eye of a soldier sorcerer. They don't think much, but when they think in dualistic terms. I've read it in their eyes. They think devourers of human insides are good so long as they devour only the enemy's insides, but devourers of souls are no good when they eat the insides of their trenchmates. With soldier sorcerers, you never know. And then that kind of continues once again with a lot of repetition brought into it, where it shifts just subtly as it goes on, until later towards the end of this passage we get humans are always finding absurd explanations for things. I know this, I understand it, now that I'm able to think what I want. My brothers in combat, black or white, need to believe that it isn't the war that will kill them, but the evil eye. They need to believe that it won't be one of the thousands of bullets fired by the enemy from the other side that will randomly kill them. They don't like randomness. Randomness is too absurd. They want someone to blame. God's truth, their thinking is weak, flimsy. They think that if I'm alive after all these attacks, if no bullet has hit me, it's because I'm a soldier sorcerer. They think the worst. They say that many of their trench mates have been hit by bullets that were meant for me. So while I was reading off that quote, my camera memory card just filled up, and before I could move off all the files from it and get it back to my camera, I had a seminar that I needed to do for a class that I'm taking right now for my master's degree. And so now this is like an hour later, but hopefully I can collect all my thoughts back together, because I have filmed like an hour and a half of footage at this point, and I really don't want to go back. This is going to be so annoying to edit. I just have too many thoughts, and also they don't always come out very coherently, so I have to try several times saying them over and over. But anyways, the reason why I like that little group of quotes, I guess, because I kind of picked from a few different places in one chapter, But the reason why I liked that area so much, and really the whole chapter, but I'm not going to sit here and read this whole book to you, even though I feel like that's obviously the best. You should read this book. Like, please read this book. But the reason why I liked that section so much is because it kind of pinpoints all the themes that I've already talked about in this video. There's that sense of duality. There's that sense of needing to be able to turn on this savageness, this madness, in order to go into battle and then turn it off when you come back. There's the idea of life and death. I can't even remember if I read this part while I was talking, but there is mention of the smiling, of Alpha smiling at the other soldiers. So like so many of the things that I've already outlined, because they're my favorite recurring portions of the book or recurring themes throughout the book, they're all just like put in that one section, and that's 34 pages in. It's just, this is so well written. Like, to be able to revisit that and know that that was all kept up throughout the remainder of the book, it's really cool. It's a really cool experience to read this book. But before I get into the last kind of section I want to talk about, there's so much more to this, and I struggled with what I wanted to talk about and what I didn't want to talk about. And really, it was just, I chose to talk about the things that I felt like I could at least better articulate than others, and also that I maybe had something to add to that's not said in the book itself. But there are definitely other things throughout this book, other similarities you can find between different passages that I'm not mentioning, and it's all so good. Shout out to Nathy, who I was talking to. Also, let me know if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, because I just realized I've never said it out loud before. But we talked on Instagram after I had finished reading At Night All Blood is Black, and she had recently finished it as well. And we were just going back and forth, like, look at this part, now look at this part. All of just our favorite passages and everything. And so yeah, that helped me so much collect my thoughts. Like, having a conversation with somebody else about the book helps tremendously when I start this, which is so much of a one-sided conversation until this video is out and I get to see your comments and respond to them. So tremendous help there. But she sent pictures of these sections that were about God lagging behind the rest of the earth, that all he can do is really assess the damage of things that happen because he can't influence things like right away. And like, that's Alpha's perspective on what God would be for him. Like, that kind of perspective, it's just a little bit different than like things that we've seen in other books, and it brings just a new meaning to like all the other themes that I've talked about. So like, this book is so good. The aspect of like crossing boundaries is a huge thing. Alpha crossing boundaries into the like past the no man's land area. The words that are used to describe their trenches in general feels like they're crossing boundaries. The boundaries that are definitely crossed at the end of the book with the doctor's daughter. There's like, that's a huge thing that runs throughout the book. Like, that could be talked about a lot. There's so many things. But I didn't want to risk having this video turn out to be longer than the book itself and me just being like, it's so good, even though that's all I want to do right now. So I am not talking about those things, but there's so many, and if you've seen more, please add them in the comments below. Now, the last thing I want to talk about for this book that I didn't even really fully understand or realize until after I had read it, and I was reading an interview with David Diop and also the translator Anna I can't remember her first or last name. Mostrovakis. I know I'm probably saying her name wrong. I'm gonna call her Anna, like we're good friends. But I was reading an interview with them, and it made me think more about the fact that this is a translated work. And I was already thinking about it because there's a section towards the end of the book that, I mean, jumps out at you right away. I had it marked in my book. Nathy sent it to me as like one of her pictures of the book, like one of the passages that she had highlighted. So like, it jumps out at you because it's so good. But basically, there are moments in this book where we know that there is a translator for Alpha to talk to the captain, for example, because his native language is not French. His native language is from Senegal, it's Wolof. And so Diop in this book, although he was writing it in French, wanted to convey that this is a very African language, that this is different than, that it wasn't in French, even though he wrote it in French. He wanted to add in the intricacies of the language that Alpha would have been thinking in, that Alpha would have been telling this story in, but show it in French. And then what we have, now that it's been translated into English, and that's the version that I've read, is Diop trying to write French to sound like it's in Wolof, and then Anna taking the French and translating it into English and still trying to convey that the origin of it, that it was originally, that it's thought of in Wolof. So there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of these different moments that at the time I thought was something completely different. I even wrote this down in my notes, and after reading the interview, I was like, oh, these are just to let us see that the cadence feels different, the language feels different, even though you're reading it in a language that makes sense to you, it's conveying a different language altogether that has different patterns, that has different cadences. And so then that started making a lot more sense. There's lots of phrases that come up again and again. God's truth, and I swear to you, I know, I understand, all these different areas. And now I don't know exactly which of them was added in just to convey that this was thought of in a different language from Alpha's perspective, or ones that were added in for maybe a different effect of writing style. But that is just fascinating in general. And then there's this amazing passage which is so good, especially considering this is an award for translated work, to have this in one of the translated works. So good. So it says, to translate is never simple. To translate is to portray at the borders. It's to cheat. It's to trade one sentence for another. To translate is one of the only human activities in which one is required to lie about the details to convey the truth at large. To translate is to risk understanding better than others that the truth about a word is not single, but double, even triple, quadruple, or quintuple. To translate is to distance oneself from God's truth, which, as everyone knows or believes, is single. Which, knowing that throughout the book, he's saying God's truth over and over. I mean, even on the next page, he has, I swear to you, God's truth at the little voice. It's throughout the, I opened to a random page and I found it again. It's repeated over and over, and then to repeat it here, that to translate is to distance oneself from God's truth. And to say that people believe that is a single truth, and then up against all the aspects of duality. The paragraph before is him saying that he is two people. I am assassin and judge. I am mother and daughter. I am night and day. I am fire and the wood it devours. I am innocent and guilty. I am the beginning and the end. I am the creator and the destroyer. I am double. So to have those right next to each other, I can't. I like this book too much. Oh, it's so good. And it's so true, because how do you translate some things? I remember watching K-dramas in high school, and the subtitles back then, and I don't know if it's because of where I was getting it from or what, but I feel like it doesn't happen this way anymore. But sometimes it would explain to me certain stories or a phrase that was said and why it's said that way and what the meaning is behind it. And just things like that, I appreciated so much at the time, and I feel like I haven't really seen that happen anymore. I feel like it's the translations is to translate that out or to try to find a similar saying, but it's exactly what Diop says. It's trading one sentence for another. It's not giving you that same sentence. It's saying, never mind that one, this one will do in its place. And then not only that, he talks about how it's like an invasion of borders. Which goes right back to the crossing of borders as a theme in general. For someone like me, who I feel like it's very clear, I really like themes that run throughout a story. But when a book can have that, and then also they're all connected together all the time, It's just like chef's kiss. It's amazing. Like, I know I went through a book hangover after finishing this book. I feel like I'm gonna go through a book hangover again just from filming this about this book, because it put me like right back in that mindset of just like so excited about it. I can't wait to actually purchase this book and own it. I'm going to wait because I'm really, really hoping that it's going to win the Booker Prize, and then I want one that says that it won the Booker Prize. Is that silly? I don't know. But my goodness, this book is, I can't imagine having another favorite of the year besides this book at this point. I've already compared it to how I feel about Burnt Sugar, and I feel even stronger in that comparison now. If you don't know how I feel about Burnt Sugar, feel free to check out the video from it. It was on the Booker Shortlist from 2020, and it was the first book that I did one of these style of videos about because of how much I felt for the themes that ran throughout the book. I just thought they were so good. Okay, this is going entirely too long, and I'm gonna have so much to edit. But since last year when I was doing these style of videos, towards the end I talked about if I thought it could win or get to the shortlist if it hadn't been announced yet. It's been announced. We already know this is on the shortlist. But to talk about if I think it could win, yes, I definitely could see this book winning. I'm trying not to get my hopes up because obviously the judges have different opinions than I do, and there's no way to know for sure what they're thinking or how they feel about it. But if it were me, I shouldn't say that. I haven't read all the books yet. And even my most anticipated book that I said was my most anticipated when I first went through the long list, I haven't even read that book yet. But I just can't imagine a book comparing to this for me. And I've only read nearly 4 out of the 6 on the short list. That being said, if it were me, I think that I would pick this book to win. It's so good. Oh, also, for any of the resources that I used throughout this video, I read quite a few different articles for this one because this was largely a situation I didn't know about outside of the book. And also there are other booktubers that have done videos about this book, video reviews about this book, and I love them, so you should go check out their videos as well. I will be linking all of those in the description so you can just continue on this journey of learning more and more about these books. And I just hope that at some point Anna, the translator of this book, will translate other of Diop's books, because I think that she did such a fantastic job with this one, at least as far as I can tell. I guess you can never fully tell how a translator did without being able to read the original language the book is in, and I don't know French, but I can only assume she did a great job because I loved this book. So I'd love to read more of Diop's books. So hopefully now that we've got a book that's got notoriety in English, we'll get other books translated to English by him, because that would be wonderful. So yeah, I think that this one could win. If it were me, I'd probably pick it. I will be coming out with reviews for the other shortlisted books, as well as I think Minor Detail I'll probably do one on. I saw some interest in that when I asked for what other books from this list, from the long list, you'd like me to review. The plans are to do the short list, and then also I think Minor Detail I'll throw in there as well. I've already read it anyways, I might as well. Anyways, with all of that being said, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you enjoyed this book if you've read it already, and if you have, please let me know your thoughts on it in the description and other little things that you noticed. I love hearing about them. And if you're reading the books from the shortlist or even the long list in general, what have been your favorites so far? Which ones are you most excited about reading? Which one do you want to win if you've got a preference already? And subscribe if you want, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!